Hi, everyone. I am Brent Hamachek, Chief Communications Officer for the Freedom Chamber, and you are joining us on a very special edition of Inside the Square. The Freedom Chamber, by the way, is the only organization with a national footprint that is truly dedicated to meeting the needs and interests of small and privately owned businesses. So if you want to be able to improve your minds, your bottom line, and your public policy influence, please go to freedomchamber.net and consider joining today. And speaking of joining today, I am joined today by Casey Fleming, the CEO of Black Ops Partners Corporation and the author of the upcoming book, Red Tsunami, The Silent Storm Killing Your Freedom. Casey, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
You have got an extraordinary background. People need to realize, and you'll share it in a moment, but folks, Casey is truly an expert in international counterintelligence, sort of domestic espionage and mischief making, if you will. Those are lay people terms, not technical terms. Consults for Fortune 500 companies, has his own group, and has been studying knee deep in this for a very, very long time. So Casey, let's start by doing that quick background so people realize just how important it is they stick around for the next 30 minutes.
Well, my background is really kind of the viewpoint that we look at this from. And it's through business and it's from technology, then management consulting. I did Silicon Valley and other technology turnarounds, and then tripped over this 15 years ago by attending or being appointed to an FBI briefing. And it was on economic espionage. And I said, wait a minute, these are my clients. Could it be this bad? And so we commissioned a study, and it was worse than we ever thought. So if you're at war, which we determined 15 years ago, if you're at war, you have to become intimate with your enemy. And that's where we are today. That's the viewpoint. That's what's going on. And I can tell people what other people either won't or can't, because I don't work for the government. I advise the government. So I'm able to speak very candidly on what's going on.
And you are a subject matter expert on the threats that are posed to the United States by the activities out of China. And so what I'd like to do is make this almost sort of an inductive conversation. We'll start specific and we'll get general. So everybody's, unless they've been living in a salt mine for the last few weeks, they are familiar with the No Kings protest that took place across the country last weekend and before, really, in Los Angeles. I guess that was the warm-up act for what was going on. But what I want to say to the audience before you talk about in detail the Chinese piece, I want to frame this for people because they can lose track a little bit. It's perfectly legitimate within a country for people to have differences on policies. You can have a different thought about should our borders be open or should they be closed. You could also have a legitimate difference over within the differences. For example, how should we or shouldn't we deport people? What tactics can we use? Those are legitimate differences. But what I think gets lost on people sometimes is that those legitimate differences within a body politic can be exploited by outside sources for their own nefarious purpose. So they take advantage of what would be otherwise a normal national sort of spirited argument, and they exploit it and manipulate it. And so I think it's important to understand that piece, that it's still okay to have disagreements on policies, but you need to be aware of what's happening under the current. And so if you could speak to that, let's talk about the No Kings protest.
Well, it's just part of the bag of tricks that the Chinese Communist Party throws out. It's the war on America. It's the war. It's called unrestricted warfare, and it basically means taking down your enemy by any means necessary, just short of conventional war. And so they also have distractions right now with Ukraine and the Middle East. But really, what's happening is people don't know what's happening unless you see what's going on. So the No Kings protest, also the LA riots, were greatly funded by the Chinese Communist Party. and also through an American billionaire living, it's been traced to him as well, living in China. And then, of course, other people that they call useful idiots. The communists call useful idiots. Anybody that's not a communist that's helping them accomplish their mission is somebody that they've turned in their mind. As you mentioned, you know, basically creating division between people, creating that mistrust and all that. That's what they play upon. They play upon chaos, the mistrust, and so on. And that's all out of the communist playbook. The one thing I will remind everyone that I work off of counterintelligence. Counterintelligence is not political. So if any of the information we talk about seems political, it is absolutely not. And I would say you might even be a little bit compromised if you think something, what I speak about is political. I have 15 years of experience in this, and I'm happy to share it with people who really want the detail.
Yeah, that is the shame of it, by the way, in this country that we have that's become so binary now in terms of how it views issues, that if you point something out that is an objective fact, people try to figure out which side it goes on, as opposed to just it being an objective fact that needs to be dealt with. You know, you mentioned something about the funding. I asked you a question that wasn't in my thought process before we started. People often talk about a foreign government funding something. And that seems very simple, right? Okay, well, they're spending money and paying for this and supporting it. Be a little bit specific, if you can, as to exactly how it is that the Chinese government can be involved in funding an activity, a national activity inside of the United States. Because I think that could be a little bit esoteric to typical folks.
Great question. So that's
I ask one per show.
exactly. That's all part of unrestricted warfare. And, you know, the first thing is that we should not allow foreign influence in any matter into our society. We should be run by ourselves, by American citizens and American politicians and the people we put in office. And of course, we're all guided by the Constitution. So allowing a foreign entity to come in and to sway people's minds and to create confusion is something that we should never, ever tolerate. What I will remind everyone is that we are all Americans. We're all bound by the Constitution, and we now share a common enemy. And I'm just pulling the curtain back on it, but we all share a very common enemy. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. China, there's only one China, and it's completely controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. So when you buy that item that's made in China, or one of their surrogates like Hong Kong or maybe other countries that they just do a proxy with, you're basically funding the Chinese Communist Party that wants to end your freedom and wants to take that freedom away from you. And let me tell you, they will not coexist with any other country. Their belief is that they've ruled the world for 2,300 years. The last century was the century of great humiliation, and by golly, they're taking it back. There are 45 methods of communism, and this is just one of them going forward. So it's really changing the hearts and minds of our people and really focusing on the younger generations because they don't have families. They don't have extreme wealth or serious wealth to protect. So they're easier to convert to say, you know, this socialism, this communism seems to be a better way to go. I don't agree with my country. I don't agree with my economy. I don't agree with the way we make money. So it's very, very serious. And I got to share this with you. There was a news post that just came out from Chris Cuomo. And he's going, holy cow, these protests are funded by the Chinese Communist Party. This is serious. The LA protests, and we're finding out that the Columbia and the Harvard protests and all that. Oh my God, this is very, very serious. And so I sent it to a group of fraternity brothers, and I'm not 27 years old anymore, so I got a couple of years on me. And so I sent it to a fraternity brother that you think has been aligned for many decades. And he basically called out and said, oh no, the January 6th riots were much worse. And I said, those are absolutely incomparable. You cannot compare the two. So you know, even people in my network cannot see the forest for the trees. And that's why I appreciate you having me on today, so I can share this information with people.
You know, I think it's important that people begin to understand the threat that China poses that so many folks have been talking about for a very long time. And I think that somehow or other, they've gotten us so addicted to what they provide to us, whether it's their investments or their cheap products or their medications, that we're a little bit strung out. And I'm going to go sideways and talk about that. I was going to come to that at the end, but let's just ramble a little. How do you view the success of China's infiltration, not just into the United States, but into the West overall, in terms of getting us, and I'm going to stick with the term since I'm a recovery guy, getting us strung out and addicted to all that they provide? It seems to me they've woven into us almost like a spider tumor. And now extraction would be very painful for sure, and perhaps too painful for Westerners to even deal with. How successful have they been? How do we see this infiltration?
This infiltration and subversion has been extremely successful. They've been doing it over 4 decades. And it came from 1986, month number 3, program 863. So they've been at it a while through our universities, through our schools, through our businesses, state, federal, local governments, and all of it. You just name it. So they've been extremely successful. But I've got a question. You posed a good question. Here's another good question. So, pay me now or pay me later. You
Uh-huh.
know, if they go into a hot war, which it is absolutely planned that they go to the hot war. Remember, unrestricted war is over 150 methods of weakening before they have to go or before they want to go to hot war. They follow Sun Tzu. They want to win this war without fighting. They want us to basically capitulate and just say, please just take us over. And don't forget, I don't want to scare people, but the FBI director, the previous one, came out many times and said that China is the single largest threat to the future of the United States. Then later he came on and said they're in all of our critical infrastructure and so on. If you shut down the water and the electricity and the internet for a week, now you see what's going on. So I don't want to panic people, but the problem is I'm like it. They say, well, how do you deal with this, Casey? I said, I'm like an ER doctor. After you see everything for about a month, you kind of get used to it. The problem is I have to communicate what I've seen and what I know to everybody else so they can be aware of what's coming down the road.
Well, let's talk about awareness. And by the way, it seems to me folks would have done well to take Napoleon's advice of letting China sleep, because he warned about what would happen when they awakened. And it turns out it looks like he was right. But I want to talk about naivete a little bit in two different ways. Two quick examples that I always think about. One is because I'm quite limited as a person, comes from the movie Die Hard. Bruce Willis in the Nakatomi Tower, and the bad guys have taken it over and they're holding everyone hostage. And there's the slick business guy who says, look, these people want to make a deal. I'm just going to go in and make a deal. And so he wanders into the head guy's office and he says, I can give you the guy who's doing this. I can help you. And they talk to him and they use him. And when they're done, they shoot him in the head and he's finished. And so he thought that this could just be approached like any other deal. The other form of naivete to me comes from folks that don't think about the Soviet Union in World War II. And what I mean by that is Hitler's calculation was, when he invaded Russia, that the Soviet citizens were so persecuted by Stalin that they would jump on the bandwagon to get behind, excuse me, the invading German troops and turn on their own government. And yet, the exact opposite happened, as we well know. And then we also know years later when Stalin died, there was a nationwide mourning and giant parades of mourners for Papa Joe. Now, I talk to business people who deal with people in China, and they say Chinese business people hate the government just as much as we do. If there's anything that starts to go sideways, they're going to rebel. They're going to take our side. So with that long setup, I want you to address the naivete that seems to exist within the American political community and the American business community and this threat.
It's the naivete is extremely prevalent. And I remember back in the day, I mean, I actually sat with the head of the NSA recently retired head of the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command, and I was telling him what we know, and he said, "Casey, it's much worse than you know." I said, "Well, we need a warfare center," and he said, "That's a great idea," but he wasn't all in on making it happen. Everybody thinks that we've got all this time, and we don't. We've been played. Our government has been played by the Chinese Communist Party, and therefore the people have been played. Mainstream media does not show all of what's going on. So I've actually had to write a book. I wrote a book, and we'll talk about that later, but I've been asked so many times to write a book. In all of my travels and speeches, they said, "Hey, look, you've got to write this book." So anyway, we'll talk about that later, but the naivete is absolutely there. It's apparent. On one hand, I like to see mainstream and Main Street covering the CCP funding of these riots to show what's really going on, and riots/protests. But that's just one of 5,000 data elements, 10,000 data elements that's really been going on under the scenes. People need to know what to watch for and what to look for, and someone to connect the dots for them, and then everything will light up. I promise you, the Christmas tree is going to light up when all the dots are connected. Hint, there's a book coming out.
Right. So let's sit there for a minute. You talked about a number of different things taking place, this funding of these protests being only one of them. Give folks a couple of more specific examples where they can actually perhaps already have seen it, and now they can go look and learn more about it and say, wow, he's on to something. Give us a couple more examples.
Well, the two Chinese colonels wrote a book. Chinese PLA colonels wrote a book in 1999 called Unrestricted Warfare. It pretty much went through without any hurrah or attention. But they are following that book very, very closely. And unrestricted warfare, they grow every year. Everything in Western society has been weaponized against us. Xi Jinping claims that, and claimed that 5 years ago, and even recently last year, that everything in the Western society, we will weaponize against you and your freedom. So that's really what's behind this thing. Number one, so the overall strategy is unrestricted warfare. There are 150 methods before it ever needs to go to conventional or hot war. Number one, drug warfare. Everybody knows somebody in their family or their network that's died from fentanyl. Fentanyl is manufactured in Wuhan, China, and shipped to the western coast of Mexico, called Michoacan, to use the drug cartels' highly efficient drug distribution networks. They're in partnership with the cartels also to launder money. So, and by the way, what an efficient way to kill tens of thousands. Now think about this. What an efficient way with plausible deniability to kill tens of thousands of military-aged young men every year. Drug warfare. Part of drug warfare, people don't think about it, is vaping units. Vaping units have formaldehyde in the liquid, cadmium metal, and cadmium burners, which is a known carcinogen. Here's another one, cognitive warfare. Well, by the way, the last thing I'll tell you on drug warfare, nobody thinks about it, but think about dopamine as a drug. And so TikTok is digital fentanyl in the drug warfare column.
Interesting characterization.
Then you go to cognitive warfare, which includes narrative warfare, information warfare, psychological warfare. There you go, TikTok, Temu, Shein. So the point is somebody's going to connect the dots, and they will be here very, very shortly.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about endgame and what that could look like. Excuse me again. You mentioned Sun Tzu. And, I think there's a lot of business people out there who have read the book that came out, 30 years ago, maybe, Sun Tzu and the Art of Business, the great adaptation of Sun Tzu principles to the business world. Unfortunately, virtually no one outside of academic circles has read Sun Tzu, the actual art of war. In terms of an end game, winning without firing a shot, I've long suggested that the Chinese don't someday want to take over Dresden in 1945. They'd rather take over something that looks a little bit more like, say, an EMP bomb went off in all the buildings are standing, but the people are gone, so to speak. What would an end game look like? One final point on that that I think is important for people to remember. I'm an Ayn Rand fan. One of the things she talked about in warning about the creep of socialism is that the problem with predicting what socialism will do is that it doesn't happen overnight. And so because it happens so gradually, people constantly deny that it's happening at all, paraphrasing a bit. But the creep of it made the prediction of it unreliable to many because they say, well, you said this was going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. So talk about an end game and what that could look like.
Well, first, let me address what you just said. People dismiss it because it doesn't happen all at once. This is really Pearl Harbor happening every day and every night while you sleep. The Chinese call it death by 1,000 cuts. We call it boiling the frog. So and that's guys like me, we see it all day, every day. And that's why it's important for us to, folks like us who can talk about it, to get the message out to every American and also every person in the free world. So the end game can take on any flavor. It could be civil war in the United States because they put one group against another. And they put all groups against all groups. Then they lay on another pandemic. Don't forget where COVID came from. Don't forget where the fungus was just, we don't know what came through with the fungus that just recently was caught being infiltrated into the United States. But I got to say something about that as well. The DEA and our government will tell you that they intercept about 1% of really what comes through. So think about the fungus and whether other things are smuggled into the U.S. That fungus was meant to be a crop killer, a blight. So you've got all these different things. Bio-warfare, that's bio-warfare. That's happening here as well. So Endgame could take on anything. It could take on complete darkness with water, electricity, internet. They could take on attacks with our hospitals, our airlines, and Wall Street. In my opinion, when you see the news, and I came from technology, don't forget that when you hear somebody saying, oh, well, our systems were down for 3 hours or most of a day because of a glitch, back in the day, we created parallel and redundant mission critical systems. So when somebody says there's a glitch, somebody's trying to protect their stock price. So it can take on any number of, the next pandemic or a layering of crises, pandemic, electricity, grid failures, food failures, supply chain failures, all that stuff, to the point where, think about it. They estimate American people can only take 1 or 2 weeks of it before they say, uncle, turn it back on. Help us. Yes, we'll do whatever you say. So and the other thing is they're pitting a lot of us against each other. I just mentioned a fraternity brother. I'm still burning from that. He's my American brother, for God's sake, and I want him to be safe and I want his family to be safe, but he's naive. And by the way, he's a pretty high level attorney. I'll just lay it at that. There's a lot of fraternity brothers. You won't know who it is. So anyway.
Got it. And so each time you answer a question, there's something inside your answer that piques my curiosity and makes me want to go in a different direction. You mentioned the Wuhan lab. And so I think it's fairly settled matter now that COVID-19 came out of that lab. I think everyone kind of agrees on that, except people who think the earth is flat. And there's still a bunch of them, I suppose. But what perhaps we don't know for sure, although different people have different strong thoughts, was it released deliberately or accidentally? Let's set that aside, because for my question, what I'm curious about it isn't relevant. What I want to know from you is, however it was released, watching the response in the West, what do you think the Chinese government learned about the Western man as it is?
Number one, that pandemics work. And from our information and our intelligence, that there are other pandemics that are planned, emanating from China, That's from our counterintelligence. And the other thing is that the American people and the rest of the world can absolutely be manipulated, and the governments can be manipulated. So that's what they learned. So that's why, I wouldn't be surprised of seeing some type of a layered effect of an attack. And and remember, I didn't say anything about military yet. It's all been all these other unrestricted types of attacks on Americans and the rest of the free world. And incidentally, all of my contacts and colleagues in other countries, UK, Canada, Australia, Germany, France, you name it, they all say, if America sneezes, we die of pneumonia. So, America's the one that they're all hoping figures this thing out.
So, sort of the last big question, biggest one of all, and you don't need to give a Sherman-esque disavowal to this because it's only hypothetical. But I understand in a few years there'll be an opening coming up on Pennsylvania Avenue, and there's going to be a new president. Let's pretend it's you, and let's pretend that Casey Fleming is now the commander-in-chief. And what would you do as the steward of American government to fight back against this Chinese threat?
Number one, I would stop all foreign influence. And any American caught taking foreign influence is going to get treason and charges on treason. And I would 10x the charges on treason. We've had way too many leaks happening so far, powering our enemy. I would also decouple as much as possible from China and create. The world is already bipolar. Nobody wants to look at it. Nobody wants to agree with it. Everybody wants to be naive. The world is already bipolar. China is at the center. They are the grand puppeteer over Russia, Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, and a whole host of other countries that are following that lead. And so I would absolutely start decoupling away from our dependence on China. I would have a warfare center to counteract and countermeasure everything that China's doing to the free world and most importantly, the United States, as I mentioned earlier. I would also run background checks on everybody because we are already extremely infiltrated and subverted by China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and North Korea. So, and the borders have been open for a very, very long time. Another scary thought that we estimate that there's over 66,000 Chinese PLA military people that came across the border for use later on and hidden in sleeper cells and in safe houses. So I would do a total cleansing on it. And yes, all driven by the Constitution to protect Americans, because as a commander in chief, my job would be to protect the American people at every and any cost. And sometimes it may go against civil liberties to do that, but the Constitution prevails in protecting people.
So I said last question before wrapping up, and I lied, a true confession. One more, if that's okay.
Sure.
If you can stay an extra moment or two. And I'm wondering, since we've used all sorts of examples, let's use one from aviation. And let's use that example of the point of no return. Out over water, gone so far you can't turn back because you can't make landfall on your side from which you left. Have we crossed with the Chinese threat to our independence and freedom and security? Have we crossed the aviator's point of no return yet? If not, how close are we?
The lights are flashing in the cockpit. We're coming up on it. It's on the horizon. If you're a pilot, that means it's about 20 miles, 25 miles, depends on how high you are. So yeah, it's on. We can see the horizon from here. We can see the line. It's there. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 9.8 out of 10. That's where we are. And that's why we don't have time to mess around anymore. You can also see, in the last 4 years, you saw craziness come up. That craziness is not going to stop until we put it down. That craziness, by the way, is in the United States with all these different things that are happening. Don't forget, we'll connect the dots for you later on. But we are very close to the point of no return. I'm actually happy that the people are now coming out of the woodwork saying we want answers. That the spy balloon, that was another visual. There are over 40 separate CCP police stations on sovereign U.S. soil to persecute anyone that's against the CCP. Think about that. How many FBI stations do you think we're going to have inside of China? So these kind of things, buying land out of military bases for what? To launch drones and rockets and missiles because they're going to put businesses up there. What's underneath that business roof? You can't inspect it or whatever. They won't allow it, or it could be underground. The point is, you've got to think like your enemy. We don't think like the enemy. We as a nation don't think like the bad guys. And the point of no return requires us all to think like the bad guys. And now I got to tell you about the book. The book's coming out in Q4. It's called The Red Tsunami, The Silent Storm Killing Your Freedom. And we connect the dots for you. And it is not a political, I don't care what side of the fence you're on. If you're an American, you want the answers and you're going to want to get this book. And I'm not here to sell books. This book is done for God and country. It certainly isn't done for anyone else other than God and country.
Well, look, I'm an author as well, so it's perfectly okay to sell books. I know my question was the PS question. Can I ask you a PSS?
Sure.
All right. And then we really will wrap it up because you're a busy guy trying to save Western civilization, and I'm just, trying to find things to do. I have a terminology that I use nowadays when talking about the American people and sort of the inner strength of the country. And the phrase I use is, this is not Sparta. And what I think back to World War II, and I can't quite imagine a moment in time now where the American people would be growing victory gardens and turning in pantyhose and bringing their tires in to support the war effort. It doesn't feel that way to me. I want your assessment, and it is the last question. How ready do you think the American people are, from a sort of a zeitgeist, to have the emotional strength to withstand a firm stance with China?
We're not ready. We're not ready at all. But the other thing is every time we weren't ready in the past, Americans rise up to the call, rise up to the fight. We're not ready. We've been weakened by our government. Our government's been infiltrated, and we've been weakened by a people, by social media, by all these things. But here's the point. I don't ever count Americans out, but the longer we wait before we wake up, the more difficult it's going to be. And by the way, for our religious friends out there, they believe this is the end of times in the Bible. And if this is the end of times, this is the final war. This is the last war. And whatever is determined in this last war is going to be the future of the world. And so there's absolutely a religious stake in this thing and a spiritual stake in it as well. So it's that level of serious. So the American people really want to wake up on this one and start saying, hey, you know what? I need to look at things a little differently today.
Casey Fleming, everybody, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. I'm sorry that I kept you after school for a few minutes. You're free to enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you'll come back maybe and talk to us again, perhaps when that book comes out in the fourth quarter of this year. Anywhere you want to tell people to follow you or find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can actually follow our company page on Black Ops Partners on LinkedIn. Black Ops Partners, follow that page, and we post every day on exactly what we're talking about on unrestricted warfare, the specific things that mainstream media won't cover. Also, T. Casey Fleming on Twitter. So that's about it.
Good stuff. Casey Fleming, thanks very much. Thanks, everybody, for watching this special edition of Inside the Square. Remember to visit freedomchamber.net and become a member today. It's worthwhile. And we will see you next time. Casey, good luck with this. You're on an important mission. We wish you every success.
Thanks very much.
The old cliche, there is strength in numbers, is very true. You can be a small mom and pop company, and maybe you by yourself can't really swing anything, but put together, 20,000 mom and pop companies. Now that could do something right there.
Business owners, it is time to connect, unite, and show our strength in numbers. We need to unite our voices and fight back. My company is proud to be a founding member of the Freedom Chamber, the pro-American business network. Join today at freedomchamber.net.